Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Why did Donald Trump partly fold on his border policy this week? That's a big question kicking around, and it probably wasn't about a future election or elected officials meeting with him. It wasn't about his tormentors on other stories like Michael Avenatti or Bob Mueller. It was largely because of this human impact. What we know Trump's orders did were exposed. Journalists and citizens, of course, documenting children suffering. There was the audio leaking of children crying, the world seeing and hearing it. Also, there were legislators who didn't stay in Washington. They went out to confront the secrecy at these detention centers. Plus, this video from far beyond the border, like children being brought to a foster agency in the middle of the night in New York, where now the mayor says the Trump administration got busted and was trying to operate in secret.
What is happening here? How is it possible that none of us knew there were 239 kids right here in our own city? How is the federal government holding back that information from the people of this city?
The administration also hiding the whereabouts of one of the children who has become the face of this policy. You see her there. You've probably seen the photo on the cover of the New Time. Now, journalists have been pressing this administration about where she is, and they've been getting stonewalled. Now, some policies are hotly debated even when people know all the facts. This isn't one of them. When people see what Trump's order does, the pictures and the harm and the facts, we know most people oppose it. So the good news may be that getting the facts out can help. The bad news is this administration continues to deploy secrecy and lies to keep hiding this policy from the public. I'm joined now by Melissa Mark Viverito, a senior advisor to the Latino Victory Fund and a former speaker of New York City Council. She came back from the border where she was organizing protests outside one of these camps. Also joining me, MSNBC contributor Sam Seder. Sam, as a student of politics and the media side of this, your view of why a Trump approach that clearly worked sometimes during the campaign and may have worked on other issues, the combination of blatant and repetitive lying plus abusing power to create secrecy around that, which is embarrassing. Why did that fail here?
Well, I mean, I think it was just because people were incredibly persistent about it. But this, I mean, this type of lying is, I think, is pretty unique. I mean, we've seen instances where the government lies, and ostensibly it's because of national security reasons, and maybe those claims are dubious or they're not dubious. They're judged on those merits. But in this instance, this is, I think, pretty unprecedented, where you have an agency lying to airlines and telling them that they're bringing on soccer teams, and you have kids snuck around it in the middle of the night. I mean, this is really disturbing stuff. I mean, I realize it's second or third order when we're talking about the harm that's actually being done to these children. But when you start to look at the questions of authoritarianism and sort of fascistic mechanisms, it's this stuff that is, I think, really, really disturbing, where an agency feels like they can unilaterally lie to civilians for no justifiable reason other than they just don't want the citizenry to know what they're doing.
Melissa, speak to that point, both some of the organizing you've been involved with and also, Sam, noting that the airlines and other entities, which we don't think of as leaving any kind of radical civil rights efforts per se, have stepped up relatively quickly based on what? Based on the fact that the public was informed about what was happening.
Well, let me just say one thing very clearly. These children are already disappeared. They're desaparecidos. They're to their families We don't know where they are. They're traumatized, as the prior guest had said. Now they're here in New York City and across other states. And we got to figure out ways that we can lend support and make sure that these kids get the proper attention. I would hope, and if I could be vetted quickly enough, I would like to house one of these children. And I think we need compassionate people that are going to be able to embrace these children and do everything that they can to help them be reunited with their families. But it is the persistence and the perseverance of those who are appalled by us losing our democracy, and that this Republican.
And I hear you on all of that. I think those are very important points. What about the topic at hand?
No, the issue of the secrecy. Well, that's what the issue is about exposure and about being appalled at what is happening, and that people are digging. You have reporters. What happened here in New York, where you had reporters that were digging and were trying to find out the information on their own, and were able to expose it. And the people that are out there at rallies at JFK that are doing candlelight vigils in front of the organization that is trying to get these children paired up with custodians or extended family, that level of kind of accountability that is coming from the people that is saying that we are not going to allow you to try to do this in the dark of night, and that we're not going to allow you to separate these families. That level of accountability cannot waver and cannot wane with the signing of this so-called executive order, which really isn't doing much to change the policy. So we cannot waver in that resistance, because that is, to some extent, what is keeping things in check right now. And that is all we have at this point, it seems, because Congress is not doing what it needs to do. And this administration keeps blurring the line and seeing how much further along they can take to really appeal to that nativist base. And that's really just something we cannot allow to continue to happen.
And Sam, there are reports that some Trump loyalists say, oh, well, the materials are faked, even the pictures that were supplied by the Trump administration, and yet that fake news style rebuttal not working as well either here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Jeff Sessions was on CBN, Christian Broadcasting Network, today, claiming that they never intended to separate the children from the parents, which, of course, is a total lie. He's literally on record almost chuckling as he's talking about this as a deterrent. So they clearly got a lot of pushback, and I think, the pressure went from the citizenry to Republican lawmakers. And I think when Republican lawmakers started saying, like, hey, we're getting crushed here, you've got to save us, that's when we saw this reversal. But I just want to also say, in terms of the resistance, when people make it's one of those situations where it's like, if you see something, say something. The smallest type of pushback can metastasize in a positive way, I should say, and you get things like the airlines being sensitive to this. Like you say, these are not radical organizations, they're airlines. But as employees say, like, I have a problem with this, that small interaction can aggregate, and you start to see these things break apart. And I think this is a very important thing for the citizenry to really pick up on.
It is Friday, the 22nd of June of 2018, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, folks, because we are all Nighthawks in the diner of life. Indeed. Hey, we got some French 77s being made virtually as we speak, and we're speaking virtually also. Wow, I got to look into that metaphysical question. The digital world really messes things up now, doesn't it? Hey, what a day, what a day. I have a question. Do you really care? I do. So, a little tidbit of information about Melania's coat. The manufacturer, Zara, has already been caught making, this was in Spain, making clothes that look like Holocaust survivor. It's just weird. They look like they had like the little yellow star and striped prison garb made into nice little teddies. What was? Well, Melania apparently likes that manufacturer, but she just, I think what she was trying to get away with is that, oh, I'm so mindless, I had no idea that coat had anything to do with anything. But she wore it for the world to see. you know? And, of course, comparisons to Michelle's sleeveless dress as being the height of disrespect of the office of, the First Lady. I guess that's an office. But, we know about the partisan divide, and they're going to say that, oh, we're just getting on Melania because we're just partisan haters, and rah, 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 rah. And I would say, well, we're not haters, okay? Let's be clear about that. But, our ears might be finely attuned to the hypocrisy, because another aspect, I think, of what makes our side is, maybe a healthy bit of Holden Caulfield in all of us. The radar on hypocrisy is finely tuned. It's even sonar. It just pings so loud. Yeah. And it usually is hypocrisy from what we used to call the adult world. And now I don't know what they do. We can't call it the adult world. Though if we wanted to use the term adult as those mindless hypocrites who are in positions of authority, and by deign of the fact that they are authority, they are imbued by God to, enforce the law. Mm-hmm. And that law is whatever they decide it is at the time that they are dealing with you. Show me your papers. Are you a U.S. citizen? You can't go down this road unless you prove to me you are a U.S. citizen. Mm-hmm. If you give an authoritarian rat a cookie, they're just going to want to have the whole milk truck. In fact, they want the whole dairy farm. No, they want the franchise. They want the concession from Vlad for all the milk products that are milk producted. Okay, well, that was a weird rant, but, they're still jailing kids. Where are the girls? Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. I guess stealing girls is the thing to do when you want to terrorize someone. Stephen Miller. This is on purpose. He is trying to trigger us, I guess. Or, you know what? It's not. He doesn't even care about that. He is a sick mother. Yeah, you know what. And he's only 32. So when this is all said and done, he'll have a gig on Sinclair Broadcasting and Fox, if we allow that to continue. But I'm coming more and more to the idea of re-education camps for all these people, where they're going to get American civics 24/7. Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't work, well, I guess there's ways of, I don't know, maybe we can give them a state. Boy, I don't know, folks. It really is, what did Sam call it? Echoes of authoritarian and fascistic mechanisms. Mm-hmm. Push a button here, pull a lever there, door opens, something pops through, causes a weight to pull a pulley. Next thing you know, Sieg Heil. Yeah, well, that was how we began our day on Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Oh, you want a French 77? We need them. All right, we're gonna mix those up right away, and we'll start putting the little pour of champagne on top, and we'll all have a little bit of camaraderie as we sing the national anthems at Rick's place. Well, on the rest of the menu, yeah, in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy today, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. The tiny North Dakota town of Leith, I think it should be Leith, but they call it Leith up there, I don't know, has set a vote to dissolve rather than allow white supremacists to take it over. They almost got taken over by the white supremacists before, barely, and now they're deciding, well, maybe we want to dissolve. Yeah. When I used to bale hay on the family farm when I was a kid, up to high school, because when I was in high school, I got big enough where I could like work with my mom's dad, my grandfather, logging in the mountains around Shasta. And but I used to take a bus out to South Dakota every summer, and it was right on the border of South and North Dakota. And Leith isn't very far from the farm. Isn't that something? A racist vigilante blocks a black doctor from entering the gated community she has lived in for over 8 years. Yeah, you know, this guy was really hoping that she had a hoodie and some Skittles. That's what I'm thinking. But instead, what he did is that he called the cops on her because she didn't comply fast enough with his orders. What is it with, I don't know, authoritarians? And unconstitutional citizen checkpoints are terrifying drivers all over the country under the Trump administration. You can't go down this highway until you prove to me you are a U.S. citizen. Now, they do have some discretion. If there is some pushback, the border agents are allowing people to go through if they're obviously Americans. And you know what that means. Obviously Americans. Yeah. Okay. Well, after the break, we move to the chef's table, where Justice Anthony Kennedy just gave Steve Bannon, Breitbart Bannon, a reason to smile that his dream of deconstructing the administrative state will finally become a reality. And in a bombshell report, Trump's campaign data firm, Cambridge Analytica, had Hillary stolen emails a month before WikiLeaks published them. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but if you look at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you'll notice to the rightish of the page the chat room link, in which our roaring girl Kelly Lincoln monitors and takes care of that platform rather diligently, I might add. And to the leftish of the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you'll notice the contribute donate buttons, an integral part to the functionality of this endeavor. And thank you for your generosity. We are truly unable to do this without you. You can follow Netroots Radio at Netroots Radio on Twitter, and Tom takes care of that. The Facebook page for Netroots Radio is ostensibly handled by me, but Facebook just handles itself. You know they do. It doesn't matter what you do. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam, and also on Daily Co's as Justice Putnam, where the show notes and links are published on my diary there for each day's show about 10 minutes before showtime. And you can also follow West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on Twitter at CookbookWest. You can just type in West Coast Cookbook and speak, and by the time you get there, it'll show. And also, podcasts of the show can be had by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, YouTube, and wherever fine podcasts can be found. Mixed in with a lot of mundane ones too, so I'm not saying where I'm at. Let's get to this first story about the North Dakota town of Leith. Tiny, tiny little Leith, North Dakota. This is by Noor Al-Sabai, And, of course, he writes for Raw Story. A tiny town in North Dakota that was nearly taken over by white supremacists in 2013 is mulling a vote to dissolve rather than allow a different pair of suspected bigots to gain control in their latest bid for power. The Bismarck Tribune reported that Ryan Schock, mayor of the roughly 20-person town of Leith, 20-person, went door to door in the village and collected 12 signatures from residents who would be willing to put to a vote whether they should give up their incorporated status and turn over their affairs to Grant County. Schock told the Tribune that he took the drastic measure because he's concerned Michael Benz and Debbie Nelson, a couple that were elected to the village's council via write-in votes, may reopen old wounds when notorious white supremacist Craig Cobb attempted to take the town nearly 5 years ago. Benz has denied any association with Cobb's ideas, the report noted. However, but he did buy a Leith property from Cobb and showed up from Wisconsin just as Cobb started a national call for like-minded races to take over the town and fly flags bearing the, you guessed it, Nazi swastika. In late 2013, Cobb walked the length of the town twice over with fellow white supremacist Keenan Dutton as they campaigned to turn Leith into a whites-only village. They want a white utopia. Yes, they do. The man who flew a swastika flag outside his home was arrested the same day. The white supremacist was sentenced to prison after terrorizing his neighbors, but his probation and his court order to stay away from Leith ended in April in the aftermath of the deadly Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia last year. Leith residents relived their traumatic experience. That's what we lived with, Lee Cook, who sat on the Leith Council at the time, told the Tribune, after a suspected white supremacist, hit 31-year-old Heather Heyer with his car at the 2017 rally, resulting in her death. My first thought was, of all those people who thought we were crazy for making such a big deal of it. We heard comments of just, let him be. That's what happens when you just let them be. Well, the people of Leith will decide whether or not to dissolve on July 23rd. Remember, folks, if you see something, say something, record it, write it down, tell a friend. Do what Sam said. If you see something, say something. It's going to take citizens to stop this this takeover, all right? And we need to bear witness for these kids. So I just wanted to remind folks of that. The great T-Bog pens this next offering here at the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. And, of course, T-Bog writes for Raw Story. In a video posted online, a black doctor in Atlanta who attempted to enter the gated community where she has lived was blocked from entering by a man who called to have the police have her arrested. And let's see. Yeah, she's owned a home in this place for over 8 years. Okay. According to Dr. Nena Agucha, who she had just come off a night shift and was attempting to pull into the Buckhead Townhome Complex where she has lived for 8 years when the man blocked her with his SUV in a confrontation that lasted 30 minutes. In the video, you can see the man's white car blocking the only way into the complex, with Agucha approaching the man and pointing out where she lived as he muttered at her with his window rolled up, because he is a frightened little mofo, isn't he? All right. He got out of the car and threatened to call police on me because I was trespassing, she said in the video, adding, "This is racial profiling at its finest." According to the doctor, her antagonist called the police, as did she, explaining he called the police, so I called the police as well. Well, good. And Agucha added that the man said he didn't believe she lived in the complex and called her a trespasser, saying it was an obvious case of racism. Yeah, well, she's black. Now, this is what makes this story so infuriating. Police state the man, who was not identified, blocked her because there had been a series of air conditioner thefts in the community, which the Homeowners Association said, no, that's a lie. We have not had any air conditioner thefts in this area. A black doctor. And I got to tell you, a pretty damn nice car is going out stealing air conditioners in a sundress. Okay, Cody Fenwick from Alternate has this last offering here at the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Now, I have to mention that along the Canadian border, in which this story that Cody reports on, and in Maine specifically, there have been routine citizenship checkpoints. Routine. That doesn't make them any less constitutional, though, or any more constitutional is what I mean to say. And that is one of the reasons why in the age of Trump, with families being separated on the spot, that these citizenship, show me your paper stubs, have a much more potentially tragic meaning. One in which maybe we just don't want to make it routine anymore. Because we know what's going to happen. This story does talk about, if they're obviously Americans, we'll just let them go, which means white. Okay? Because I already have experiences in my family during the Reagan administration when they first put like what we call the El Segundo Linea, the Southern Line, miles and miles north of, what was it, like about 60 miles, 50 miles from the border into Orange County. Maybe it wasn't that far, but regardless. My brother-in-law got caught up on that, and he's an American citizen born in the United States. Oh, but his last name is Lopez, which is like Smith. But obviously, he doesn't look white, does he now? And this is what this can happen, because also we got rogue border agents stepping it up a little bit more, being a little bit more insistent, going outside their constitutional restraints, and the ACLU lawsuit will hopefully at least put, if not a stop, at least a damper on their efforts. Border Patrol agents, is there a line that you won't cross? Let's talk about that sometime. All right, we better get to our break, and when we come back, we'll go through weather from around the world, and then we'll finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea,
to the circles of your mind. A new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. Beluga whales rely on a sharp sense of hearing to communicate, to navigate, and to feed. But the ocean is a noisy place. There's commercial shipping, there's Navy sonar, oil and gas extraction, pile driving, underwater explosions. So one way to tell if all that noise is affecting belugas? Capture them for a routine physical.
So it's kind of like going to the doctor's office for them, but they're sort of also a bit abducted by aliens at the same time.
Aaron Mooney, a marine biologist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. He and his team captured 26 belugas in Alaska's Bristol Bay for a battery of checkups, including a hearing test.
We can play a very controlled design sound to the animal, a hearing test tone.
Then they measured the beluga's brain response using an electrode on the animal's head. And the diagnosis?
They're doing fantastic, and they're better than what we thought they were going to be.
And older belugas seem to have less age-related hearing loss than aging dolphins screened in previous studies. The full bill of health is in the Journal of Experimental Biology. These belugas do live in a relatively pristine environment, which might explain why they aced the hearing test. Animals in noisier waters might not fare so well, Mooney says. And the same might go for belugas, as the volume slowly rises in the underwater Arctic. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
Welcome to 60-Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. Freedom of expression is protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution. One benefit of freedom of expression is that it helps to maintain representative democracy. For example, individual citizens participate in running our country by electing their representatives to Congress and other government officials. Citizens can also participate in making decisions about government policies. To make wise choices, you need to have good information. Free expression does not guarantee complete or accurate information, but it increases the chances of getting such information. Another benefit of freedom of expression is that it helps to bring about peaceful social change. Freedom of expression allows you to try to influence public opinion by persuasion without feeling you have to resort to violence to make changes. Also, if you have the opportunity to express your opinions freely, you might be more willing to accept government decisions, even decisions you do not agree with. That's all for today's podcast, 60-Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
And this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1952. That was the day 100,000 oil refinery workers went out on strike. The work stoppage was called by a coalition of 22 unions, including AFL and CIO affiliates and independent unions. They demanded a 25-cent hourly wage increase with shift differentials. Shutdowns began at once, and picket lines were up as soon as procedures were safely completed. The strike threatened to cut production in half. Union leaders called all but the California refinery workers out, who were central to the war effort in Korea. Oil barons had given refinery workers the runaround for 8 months during contract negotiations. The union had even postponed the original strike date in March to give federal mediation a chance in effecting a settlement. When this failed, President Harry Truman brought the case to the Wage Stabilization Board, which issued a ruling favorable to the industry. 80 companies demanded separate hearings for all 200 bargaining units involved. The union wanted one hearing for all. Even after this victory for the oil companies, they then refused to attend the hearings. When the board threw up its hands in mid-April, the new strike deadline was set. 8 days into the strike, the board ordered oil workers back to work, which they flat out refused. The oil workers union stated, quote, "Strikers are fighting against a stacked deck. If corporation executives are permitted to ignore workers' needs, then to manipulate the government so the right to strike is denied, collective bargaining will be destroyed." The board then set a 15-cent an hour wage cap and shift differentials. Workers were back on the job by the end of the month, having avoided possible Taft-Hartley actions from President Truman. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Workplace exploitation is at least as old as the Industrial Revolution. But rather than using whips to make the assembly lines move ever faster, today's corporate exploiters use technology, devious work schedules, and lobbyists to extract more work from employees for less pay. Walmart, for example, wants to provide next-day delivery for online customers by having its low-wage workforce use their own time and vehicles to drop off packages as they go home after work. Economists have a technical term for these corporate ploys: stealing. One entire group being victimized by corporate thieves are the 4.3 million Americans who make up our tipped workforce. Mostly employed as waitstaff in restaurants, from big chains like IHOP to the most exclusive dining establishments, these workers fall under a grossly unjust category of labor law that allows their employers to pay a miserly minimum wage as low as $2.13 an hour. The rationale is that customers will subsidize this sub-poverty pay by leaving generous tips, a convenient corporate lie refuted by the fact that the income of tipped workers is a third less than non-tipped, and they are nearly twice as likely to live in poverty. Luckily, Trump has intervened to help. Lucky for restaurant owners, that is. Bowing to demands by restaurant industry lobbyists, Trump's Labor Department has proposed a new rule allowing employers to seize workers' tips and use them for any purpose, including fattening their own profits. Paying $2.13 an hour already amounts to a massive wage theft, but this elevates it to legalized highway robbery. This is Jim Hightower saying, even the most notorious robbers in history would be too ashamed to pull a job this wicked, but today's corporate greed and Trump's ethical bankruptcy is turning wickedness into business as usual.
If you'd like more of Jim Hightower's real populism, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter gives you the real lowdown on which corporations, by name, are doing what to the middle class, our environment, and our democracy. Each month, the Hightower Lowdown brings you facts you didn't know, along with actions you can take to fight back. It also comes with a sense of humor. Hightower believes we can fight the gods and still have fun. Plus, get this, it's cheap. Only $15 brings you 12 issues a year. For real populism, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour report recorded on June 21st, 2018. I'm Mark Belanger. Unions around the world are preparing events to mark Public Services Day, June 23rd. The day has been established to remind people about the importance of well-funded, quality public services. I talked to Rosa Pavanelli about public services. Ms. Pavanelli is the General Secretary of Public Services International. The PSI represents more than 20 million workers in 700 unions around the world. Because she moved from her native Italy to France to take on her position as General Secretary, she recently had to use a private hospital instead of a public hospital. Here's what happened.
I just want to give you an example. I live in France. I recently had to undergo a surgery. I was hospitalized in a private hospital, but then I had to run away from that hospital because they were not able to treat me, and I had to go to a public hospital to have the proper therapy and operations that I needed. So it means that when public services are well funded, you continue to trust the public system and the public sector. Of course, there's a tendency around the world that is not changing, despite the fact that there's now more and more evidence that privatization is disrupting the public system and reducing the quality of public services. That is the ongoing privatization. And when we are facing cuts in public funding, cuts in public spending, there we can say that there's a worsening of the quality in the public sector and in general a worsening of the living condition of people. Cutting in public service is responsible of large part of the growing inequality, and the access to public services is a relevant part of the disposable income for many people around the world, mainly in developing countries.
At the recent conference of the International Labor Organization, the ILO, you told the delegates that, I quote, "the global system is broken." How is it broken, and what can be done about it?
Yeah, I think that the major issue continues to be the fact that we are facing a growing inequality. The neoliberal policies that globalization is pushing, despite the evidence of the failure since 2008 of this system, has not changed the approach of the international financial institution and I would say the global governance around the world. This means that the system that we knew from the Bretton Woods institutions to the more recent governance imposed by the G20 and the OECD is not working. It's not working because it continues to perpetuate a system that is, I would say, a new form of colonialism around the world that is mainly imposed not by government but by multinational corporations. And this is concentrating the wealth in fewer and fewer hands, while spreading poverty and inequality. Poverty is growing all over the world. As poverty is growing, we assist also to the growth of populism, racism, I would say fascism around the world. Europe is an example of that, but we can look at the United States is the same, and what is ongoing also in many countries in Latin America is showing that when poverty is growing, when inequality is growing, the right wing is growing as well, or is taking advantage of this situation. This is why I think that the system is broken, because it's not only deteriorating the living conditions of billions of people around the world, but also the very foundation of our democracy.
And that's it. International labor news you can use. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. You could call them confidence-building measures. A week after a major summit in Singapore between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, there are signs North Korea is beginning to comply with certain promises the country made at that gathering. U.S. officials now say a North Korean missile facility that Kim apparently pledged to Trump that he'd destroy is the Sohae Satellite Launching Ground, a complex from which some of North Korea's most sophisticated missiles have been launched in recent years. And that's not all. Trump said Wednesday night North Korea would be handing over the remains of some 200 Americans killed in what's now North Korean territory during the Korean War of the early 1950s.
We got back our great fallen heroes.
Though the Pentagon has yet to offer independent confirmation that that process has occurred or is ongoing. Meanwhile, Japan says the threat caused by North Korea is now low enough to call off missile evacuation drills, those iconic scenes of children crouched beneath their desks that had been scheduled last year amid repeated North Korean missile tests that frequently sailed over Japan. But a more useful sign to see if the North Korean crisis is really abating will come from China, and in particular, whether Beijing starts resuming cross-border trade that China sharply cracked down on earlier this year. Trade data for June won't be released for several weeks, but Chinese President Xi Jinping hinted during a visit to China by Kim Jong-un this week that normalized trade relations could be around the corner. She said that, quote, "We are happy to see that the DPRK made a major decision to shift the focus to economic construction." He further pledged to share China's economic experiences with its neighbor. Hardly a surprise, given what's expected to be a high-stakes competition between China and South Korea to make North Korea's future economy look more like their own. Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Yes, the French 77s are all awaiting. Please help yourself. Remember, what makes it different from the French 75 is that you replace the simple syrup with the elderberry flower liqueur. Saint Germain is the best, or as we like to say in the continent, Saint Germain. Okay. Well, let's start with our weather, and we always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, along the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, in the west coast of the continental United States, or it could be on the west coast. And it is currently, it is currently 58 degrees, and we are going to be a tad cooler today, only going to 86. Yeah, we'll see. It might be a little warmer than that towards the end of the day. Winds are currently out of the southwest at about 2 miles per hour, very negligible. Will be picking up in a few hours out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Then shifting again tonight out of the northwest, continuing at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And we like that. I call that a freshening wind. Yes, we do. Tonight we're going to have a low of around 58 to 60. So maybe this is in a weather station that's a few miles out of town. But where we're at the mothership, it'll be maybe a notch or two warmer. Dry conditions will continue, it says. Grass pollen is very high. And no data on air quality, though I stepped out in someone somewhere. I hope it's not a grass fire. But it's smoky out there, and it's so beautiful. But I had to close up the house, and I never like to do that because I like fresh air. But there's no fresh air. So even though I don't have an air quality reading that would be considered official, anecdotally, I can't breathe out there, and if I can't breathe, it's bad. UV index for daytime UV remains very high at 9, and it has been for quite a while. High pressure dominates. Pressure is holding at 30.06 inches. Visibility is around 9 miles, and relative humidity is at 78%. So, getting dry. Okay, weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Okay, so the person not just outside of London is registering 71 and sunny. Paris is 70 and sunny. Rome is 83 and fair. Kiev is 70 degrees with light rain. Kabul is 76 degrees with showers in the vicinity. Hong Kong, mostly cloudy at 78 degrees. Tokyo is 70 degrees and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 51 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is 54 degrees and fair. And New York is a beautiful first full day of summer at 70 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Okay, first offering here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays is an article out of Think Progress by Ian Millhiser. You know, we're going to miss the administrative state when it's gone. You always do. In the early days of the Trump administration, when former Breitbart executive Steve Bannon was a top advisor to Donald Trump, Bannon proclaimed that one of the new administration's top goals would be deconstruction of the administrative state. Where did that come from? Yeah, Turkey. That's right. Hungary used it. and so did Vlad. Bannon is now gone, but his agenda could soon be taken up by one of the most powerful institutions in the country, the Supreme Court of the United States. Pereira versus Sessions is, at least on the surface, a minor case. It concerns a federal law that permits certain immigrants to avoid deportation if they've resided in the United States for 10 continuous years. The clock stops ticking on these 10 years, however, once an immigrant receives a notice to appear at a removal hearing. In an 8-1 decision handed down Thursday by Justice Sonia Sotomayor, the court held that a document which is labeled Notice to Appear, but which fails to specify either time or place of the removal proceedings, does not trigger this stop time rule. Justice Anthony Kennedy joined Sotomayor's opinion. Sam Alito was the only dissenter, but he also wrote a brief concurring opinion suggesting that the court should upend the balance of power between elected presidents and unelected judges that has existed since the Supreme Court's 1984 decision in Chevron versus Natural Resource Defense Council. If a majority of the court takes Kennedy up on his suggestion, and it now seems highly likely that they will, they would give a Republican-controlled judiciary sweeping power to veto federal regulations at the very moment when public sentiment appears to be shifting away from Bannon's agenda. Now, Millhiser goes on to remind us that Chevron is one of the most significant and widely cited cases of the last half century, that the power of regulatory agencies to do their job is set there, that because judges are unelected, they shouldn't be given broad sweeping veto power. That really is up to the political branch of our government. And experts know more than judges on many things. And so those regulatory experts, their opinions should carry quite a bit of weight. But when Obama, I should first mention that this was instituted during the Reagan years, Chevron. And conservatives loved it. What was not to love? I mean, you're giving power to the heads of political appointees of the president appointed? Well, that was great and all and fine and dandy until Obama got into office. And then conservatives soured on it because of the black guy. So, moving on. It looks like Neil Gorsuch it plays a bit of a role in this. I should mention, Scalia was a big fan of Chevron until Obama. And then suddenly he forgot all about his great embrace of the Chevron decision. And a decision weakening or overruling Chevron would not mean that the Trump administration's actions are all struck down by federal courts. To the contrary, it would mean that the Republican-controlled court would have broader authority to veto regulations, but that it could also stay its hand in a Republican administration while acting aggressively whenever a Democrat is in the House. Isn't that nice? So many well-placed conservatives began to sour on that decision during the Obama years, and the Federalist Society, yes, the Federalist Society, we're very upset. Now, of course, we got to remember the Federalist Society has been playing a major role in selecting Trump's judicial nominees and revealing in themselves a Bannon-like obsession with dismantling the administrative state, which makes you wonder how many rubles are in their coffers. Curious minds would like to know. You got the Federalist Society, you got the NRA in bed with the Russians. It's almost like ALEC could be in bed with the Russians, too. I mean, even the Kremlin has some sort of legislation in a box. Here, just sign here. Well, the court's right flank is already chomping at the bit to exercise such power. Neil Gorsuch, who occupies the Supreme Court seat Senate Republicans held open until Donald Trump could fill it, has written more than one opinion suggesting that Chevron should be tossed out. and it's unclear whether Kennedy would go that far. His opinion in Piera is less than 3 pages long, and much of it consists of valid criticism of lower court judges who misapplied Chevron to reach the wrong result in cases similar to Piera. However, Chevron only requires deference when a statute is unclear. The law at issue in Piera was not. But Kennedy's opinion also concludes on an ominously Gorsuchian note. Given the concerns raised by some members of this court, it seems necessary and appropriate to consider in an appropriate case the premises that underlie Chevron and how courts have implemented that decision. Well, as a practical matter, that would mean the Supreme Court would seize broad new authority over new EPA regulations governing harmful emissions, Labor Department regulations governing worker wages, and other regulations protecting retirees from rapacious investment advisors. Future Republican presidents could gain broad authority to deregulate, while Democratic administrations would be unable to act without seeking a permission slip from the likes of a Neil Gorsuch.
Danser maintenant sous l'été, les pieds nus dans le sable. Danser maintenant et jeter vos ennuis dans les vagues qui dansent.
Okay, last offering here at the at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays is by David Edwards out of Ross Story, the company that ran then-candidate Donald Trump's data operation in 2016. Reportedly obtained Hillary Clinton's stolen emails more than a month before WikiLeaks published them. In a column for the British magazine Spectator, BBC Magazine correspondent Paul Wood revealed that Cambridge Analytica, the now defunct company, they just changed their name, which was in charge of micro-targeting voters for the Trump campaign, was in possession of Clinton's emails at least a month before WikiLeaks was known to have them. The now shuttered British company did the Trump campaign's data, Wood explained. Its specialty was micro-targeting individual messages tailored to individual voters delivered by email, Facebook, and Twitter. The U.S. intelligence agencies believe that Russian internet troll factories were also pushing out pro-Trump propaganda on social media, sometimes fake news, sometimes real news, such as the hacked contents of Clinton's emails, he continued. The question is whether this was done in coordination with the Trump campaign. Wood said that he had information from an American lawyer who knew that Cambridge Analytica was in possession of the emails, which U.S. intelligence agencies later determined were stolen by Russian hackers. It's all coming together, folks. The circle's almost complete. Okay, well, that's pretty much of a blockbuster. You can read the entire column at Spectator. Go to the links provided. And looks like we're about at the end. In fact, we are at the end of our broadcast period, and we will visit with you on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. Stay tuned to Netroots Radio throughout the weekend for breaking news. Do listen to Netroots Radio for the rest of this day and throughout the weekend. And we will visit with you on Monday in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.